Old Path in our study through the Old Testament. We begin the book of Esther today. And what I'm going to do to begin this, before we actually look at the text, I'm going to put up a couple of timeline photos if I can. And you can go ahead and screenshot them and save them for yourself. Or if you need to, you can contact me through the website and I'll be happy to send them over to you. So I'm going to go ahead and put those up now. And I want to pay attention to a couple of different parts about this, or a couple of different elements, I guess you could say, that we want to look through this. I mentioned before that we wanted to kind of go through the timeline of this because we think of Ezra and Nehemiah and Esther. Because of where they're located in the book, we don't always necessarily kind of think of their relationship to time-wise, as far as the kings were concerned, the Babylonian captivity, and all the rest. I'm sure that I pointed it out plenty during Ezra and Nehemiah that was after the Babylonian captivity. So they're not in where the prophets are, but this image that I have up first here is to kind of show you the different kings that are mentioned. And really there's only two that come into focus, whether it's Esther or Ezra or Nehemiah. And so we want to make sure that we remember that in the chronology of things, the events that we're going to be studying in the book of Esther happened before the events of Ezra and Nehemiah. So the two kings that really kind of figure prominently into the three books that we're studying here, Ezra and Nehemiah, that was during the time of Artaxerxes. So before him was this other king we know as Xerxes or Ahasuerus. And you'll hear him mentioned here in this book. In the first few verses, we get Ahasuerus. And so what I want to make sure is that we understand that there are also prophets that are ministering after the exile. And this graphic here kind of helps a little bit in that understanding. You'll notice that Malachi is missing from this graph, and he's the last of them. And when we get to the minor prophets, we'll get to Malachi. But he would be the last of the minor prophets to write after they have come back from their Babylonian captivity. So when we kind of take into account all of the little moving pieces of this, it's good for us to recognize that both Ezekiel and Daniel are writing during the captivity. And so Ezra, Esther, Nehemiah, all of that is happening during and then after they start to come back in the time to re-inhabit Jerusalem and of course to build up the walls and do all of what they were going to be doing. We've already studied those too. Now, here's another one that's more concise. It's a little bit easier to follow. And if you remember when we went through the book of Ezra, the first 6 chapters was more historical. And it's not until chapter 7 that you find the introduction of Ezra as the person that's doing the things currently as the book is being written. So you see in this one here that the first 6 chapters of Ezra really kind of starts from the time that Cyrus was going to begin the process of sending them back. And then Esther follows on with that, where you have Ahasuerus or Xerxes. And then it gives, after her time, or after the episodes that we read here, it gives to another king that takes over after Xerxes, and that being Artaxerxes. So these two, hopefully these two little bits here will help a little bit in showing kind of what we're wanting to kind of grab onto of what happened. It was Nebuchadnezzar, and he came in with the Babylonians, conquered Jerusalem, took them away for those 70 years that we know about from the study of the text when we went through all of that, and when we're going through the Chronicles and all the rest. And so now, after those 70 years have taken place, we had been studying both Ezra and Nehemiah, of them coming back into the land after Zerubbabel. So even if we go back as far as Zerubbabel, we can remember that when it comes to Esther, she's after the initial part of that coming back with Zerubbabel. So she fits in after Zerubbabel. Then there's what we're reading here in this book, and then it's going to give way to Ezra and Nehemiah. So again, the way that they're placed in the Bible is not in chronology, even for those three books. So Esther would have come first in the chronology. So I just kind of wanted to throw all those things out there because they're just kind of interesting, and it gives us a chance to see the other prophets. And I will say this: if you look up the minor prophets, there is not total absolute agreement that there were only three of the post-exile prophets. Some of them think that a couple of the minor prophets were also after the exile. So anyhow, for those people who like to look through that, this one I think is pretty much consensus, I guess is a good way of putting it. So I figured I'd put those up. Makes it a little bit easier to track with them, and kind of keep it in your file if you can, because it's always good to reference back when you're thinking of who are the kings and who was the prophets at the time, and who was telling them of the things to come, which ones were looking towards Israel, which ones were looking towards Judah. All of those kind of questions are kind of interesting when you're studying through the text. So it's good to have the information kind of at your fingertips. So with all that being said, we get to Esther. We're not going to get, it's not going to be a very lengthy study today, because it really only gives the backstory as to how did it all come to pass, and how did Esther get into the position that she was. And chapter 1 just kind of fills in all of those little bits and pieces for us. We are introduced to something here that we hear mentioned. It's mentioned again in Daniel, because this is at a time when, by now, when we're talking about these kings, the Babylonians have been conquered by the Persians. And so the Persians are the ones who are in control here. Where the base of operation, if you will, or their capital that you hear mentioned, Shushan or Susa, there is the royal palace, there's the city and all of that. It's not in modern day Iraq where Babylon would be. In fact, this is just kind of to the south and a bit to the east in what is modern day Iran, just a little bit to above the Persian Gulf. And so the end of that waterway, the Persian Gulf, they'd be up over here a little bit to the east and a little bit to the north. So anyhow, or north and west, I should say. Anyhow, that just kind of shows you that the power structure, if you will, is moved from Babylon to the south and to the east, and it is in modern day Iran, where the Persians would have had their citadel that we hear spoken about here. So just information, kind of interesting, because we'll see this. Where is Shushan and what is it? And so excavations apparently there show just how massive this was. There's an event that takes place here that is almost hard for us to fully grasp and wrap our minds around. And what would be the reason why they would have such a massive set of feasts and observances and everything else. And there are some historians that point out that we know this of some of the battles fought by the Persians seem to coincide a little bit with this time, and it may very well be it's preparation of going to war. It's kind of stirring the people to the idea of the cause and the expansion of the kingdom and all of that kind of stuff. So he's going to put on full display everything that is of the greatness of them. We know that they are going to ultimately have a series of encounters with the Greeks. The Greeks will finally defeat them, and so it will give it will roll over from one kingdom to the next, from the Babylonians to the Persians, and then from the Persians to the Greeks ultimately to the Romans. So all of that is going to kind of play out in history, and we're just kind of looking at a particular segment or part within that history. So Book of Esther, chapter 1, let's have a word of prayer and we'll take a look at the text. Father, we thank you as we come to your word. We pray that you would help us in our understanding of it. And again, it's the history of this particular book and why is it important to us. There are just more things that we can learn from it other than just the history and making application to what we read. So we pray that you would glorify yourself through the teaching of your word, and that you would help us to grab onto the things that are necessary for us to know and to learn, and how it would grow us in our relationship with you. We give to you all thanks and praise in Jesus' name. All right, so chapter 1, we read in verse 1, It came to pass in the days of Ahasuerus, and it tells us, because there's more than one Xerxes. And so it says, now this was the Ahasuerus, or Xerxes, another name for him, who reigned over the 127 provinces from India to Ethiopia. So this speaks of his expanse. There's quite a bit here. But it says, in those days when King Ahasuerus sat on the throne of his kingdom, which was in Shushan, or Susa, in the citadel. So there was the city itself, but then there was also the palace, the citadel, the fortress, everything about the grandeur of it. And it doesn't seem like he feels all that threatened because of what we see taking place next. It seems like a lot of people have the ability to kind of come and go. And there are some who kind of set the scene here, is that he keeps bringing in from all of the provinces and the places of his empire. It's a preparation of bringing all the leadership, and it would have to be somehow rotational, because what we're going to read about as he's entertaining, if you will, all of these people, it goes on for 6 months. So you're not going to tell somebody or a whole group of people, all of your heads of state, if you will, all of your nobles and all the rest, to come and spend 6 months. It's more than likely it's in somewhat of a rotation, but it's kind of I guess you could almost say, kind of an open house. And so we're not told why he decides to do this. There's not a lot of detail to it. It's just historians believe that this is the run-up for all of their campaigns that are coming up, and this is to get people involved in it, engaged in it, and to go through the planning and all the rest. So that's what is speculated here. So it tells us now, in the 3rd year, in verse 3 of his reign, he made a feast for all of the officials and the servants, the powers of Persia and of Media, the nobles and the princes of the provinces before him, being before him. So again, this is bringing in all of the powerful people. Whatever it is that you're going to do, and it would certainly seem that there's a motivation behind this, bringing in all of those people and making sure that they know of your plans and what you're wanting to do go forward. This seems to be that's the reason behind this. There's something that's taking place, and he's going to bring them to see these things. So when he showed the riches of his glorious kingdom and the splendor of his excellent majesty for many days, 180 days in all, and when these days were completed, the king made a feast lasting 7 days for all the people who were present in Shushan the citadel, from great to small, in the court of the garden of the king's palace. So when this 6 months was over, there was one last thing that he was going to do, and it would be for all of the people who were in that particular area. When it says small and great, it's no longer the nobles, it's no longer the princes, it's no longer the officials. This is just for everyone. It's very celebratory. So again, if the speculation is that they're preparing for what's going forward, and there's war and there's campaigns and everything else, it's getting everybody involved in the process. There's an excitement. It's the expansion. It's, this is who we are, and this is what we're going to do. So that's the speculation. I don't have any reason to doubt it. The dates seem to line up from what we have here, knowing of historically the things that were taking place and battles and whatnot that he was involved with, that Persia was doing. So with all that, let's just assume that that's the case. There's a little bit of a description of how really opulent everything was in the way that it was put together. There were white and blue linen curtains. They were fastened with cords of fine linen and purple, silver rods and marble pillars, and the couches were of gold and silver on a mosaic pavement of alabaster, turquoise, and white and black marble. And this is really given to us so that we get some kind of an understanding of just how amazing the optics of this were. When people go to see it, this is just such an impressive display of wealth, but it would also be one of power as well. So it's pretty hard, whether you agree with that a person should live in this kind of luxury. What it ends up projecting is really the intention here. You do this because you can, and it projects to anyone who sees it, this is a person of enormous power and strength and everything else. So I'm sure it would be pretty awe-inspiring and intimidating, especially if you're someone who would try to see yourself as a rival somewhere down the road, that kind of a thing. Anyway, but it is a way of kind of expressing the majesty and the glory of your kingdom, to have things like this that people would just be completely awestruck by. So it says, and they served drinks in golden vessels, each vessel being different from the other, with royal wine in abundance according to the generosity of the king. So each of these was crafted individually. It's not, now this is not like looking in most of our cabinets where we got, where do we get that cup from and where do we get that one from? This is really more saying that each of them was handcrafted to be unique. And so most of us who have the collection of glasses and mugs and everything else is because we bought them over the years and some break and this is what's left over. This is rather, they're all custom. They're all one of a kind, and they're gold and people drinking from them. So it says, now, in accordance with the law, the drinking was not compulsory. For so the king had ordered all the officers of his household that they should do according to each man's pleasure. So it's a feast, but people are not demanded to do as everyone else does. People are free to do as they wish to do. Now it says in verse 9, Queen Vashti also made a feast for the women of the royal palace, which belonged to King Ahasuerus. So this is the first time we hear her mentioned, and she's going to dominate, and her actions are going to dominate the rest of the chapter. Here it seems as though she's doing what she's supposed to do, and she's entertaining the ladies. What the guys are doing is a little bit separate. You can see that the culture there, like it was in that part of in those parts of the world at the time, there was the separation. There was the classes even among men and women, and so there was the separation that took place. So in verse 10. On the seventh day, when the heart of the king was merry with wine, means he's feeling no pain, it says that he commanded Mehuman, Biztha, Harbona, Bigtha, Abagtha, and Zethar, and Carcass, 7 eunuchs who served in the presence of King Ahasuerus, to bring Queen Vashti before the king, wearing her royal crown, in order that he could show her beauty to the people and to the officials, for she was beautiful to behold. So we've seen movies like this, and you know, it's nothing weird, nothing out of the ordinary. Yeah, I say it's weird. I'll put it a different way. Yeah, it's kind of weird. What he wants to do is show off his wife and show off his queen. And again, it's just kind of one of those things that you can see a guy who's really kind of feeling it and has been drinking and everything else wants to put on a show. So he wants to put on his wife as kind of, hey, look at my wife, look at her beauty. And so he sends the eunuch guys to go get her and make sure that she comes back dressed. If she's wearing her crown, she's wearing everything royal, everything that's regal. Now, we can look at this and have a total appreciation for why Vashti would say, not a chance. I'm not going to go there just to be a spectacle. Clearly, he and the guys have been drinking, and that's what this is all about. I can get the fact that she would want nothing to do with this. It makes perfect sense. So that you can see the setup for this. You see where this is going, right? So in verse 12, it says, but Queen Vashti refused to come at the king's command brought by the eunuchs. Therefore, the king was furious, and his anger burned within him. So he's not going to let this go. She really has one option at this, and it's not like they go back a number of times and she capitulates. What she has done, and again, I can understand entirely why she would want to say, I'm not going to be a spectacle. This is ridiculous. I picture her saying something very similar to that. Well, what ends up happening in the series of events, let's remember that what we have here, I believe, is God orchestrating everything in this. Now, one of the things that you'll hear said about the book of Esther, God is not mentioned in the entire book. But his handprints clearly are all over this, I believe. And I think it starts right here. Does he harden her heart because a much greater thing is about to take place? See, remember, the people who are there are people of the captivity. They're people of the Babylonian captivity that is now the Persians. There are a lot of Jewish people living here in this place, and there is a desire, as we will find, for them to be completely destroyed and eradicated. And it is only because of Esther's position that that ends up not happening. So is it just a curiosity? Is it just kind of one of those, well, it's just, fortunate timing, it's a coincidence? All of the above are things that people might speculate. For me, and for what I know of this, and from what we can read, I don't think that there's any real question as to that God moved upon her heart to just say, no, I'm not going to do this, because he is going to move Esther into that place. So moving on Vashti to just, no, I'm not going to have any part of it. Can I see God really kind of solidifying her in that and making her want to, just be resistant? Or are there counselors next to her? Does he stir them up? However the case may be, she's not having any part of it. And it sets in motion a whole series of events that changes everything. So we read in verse 13 that it says, now the king said to the wise men who understood the times, for this was the king's manner toward all who knew law and justice. And that's the important part. It's okay, what do we do here? He could do something in a fit of rage, in a fit of anger. And instead, before he just makes any kind of decision, he's going to consult with the people who would have some input. And so he wants to talk to the counselors. Now, these would be 7 princes that are mentioned here, are 7 people that are of all of his inner circle. These are the greatest of the inner circle. And there is a place that you'll find in Ezra. We'll give you the reference here in just a moment. It's chapter 7. I think it's 7:14. Let me just look it up. Ezra 7:14. I have it in my notes here. Ezra 7:14 tells us about that there were these counselors. Now, it's a different time frame, which is kind of interesting. But in this, there were these counselors that were around the king, and they're mentioned as the 7. Though it was a different king, Ezra versus Esther, Ezra versus Esther, it's still the fact that there are these inner circle kind of counselors. And these are people who have the best of an understanding about, if we're going to put something in place, what's the enforcement part of it? And if you're going to make a decision, how do you make sure that the decision is binding? And it's an interesting thing. What do I do about my queen who has rejected my direct order to her? What should then be done? And remember what's also taking place here. If a king who has the incredible authority that he does can be rebuffed by his queen to say, yeah, I know he sent for me, and I know that you guys are officially here on his behalf, I'm not going. The king is going to have to think long and hard about, how do I do this? Because first of all, he's got to save face. There's got to be some kind of a treatment of her that's got to be a big deal. And then you find that with the counselors, they have him go to the fullest extreme, just short of killing her. And that is to banish her entirely and make it that he can't, down the road, change his mind in the whole thing. And again, there's speculation in this, because we're going to see what their counsel is. Their counsel, it again, speculated that they don't want to have the possibility of having some kind of punishment of her that could come back on them if she gets back in the good graces of Ahasuerus or Xerxes. So let's see how that plays out. I'll try to develop it as we go along. So he said to the men who understood the times, that was the normal thing that they would do. These were the closest to him, and then and to him these were their names: Karshana, Shethar, Admatha, Tarshish, Maris, Marsina, and Memucan, the 7 princes of Persia and of Media, who had access rather to the king's presence, and all who ranked highest in the kingdom. So these are the inner circle of the inner circle, and these are the guys that know what are customs. How is this going to play out? What will it look like if we do this? And if she's done this, your reaction should be this. And again, customs, all of this, the formality of it is a big deal. Clearly, formality is very, very high in the priority to them, as we can see by the fact that he's thrown a 6-month long, here, take a look at the expanse of what we have. Let me get everybody on board. The 7 days of feast, all of it. There's a lot of formality that goes on here. So it says, what shall we do? This is what the king asks. What shall we do to Queen Vashti according to law, because she did not obey the command of King Ahasuerus brought to her by the eunuchs. This is the king asking this, asking in the third person. So he understands the gravity of it. I mean, all eyes are on. This not like some simple little thing when they're just talking between themselves and she doesn't want anything to do with whatever he's talking about. This is done in the full recognition of everyone. Last day of the feast, they have been drinking for a while, obviously. He's feeling the effects of it and decides, let's bring out my wife, only to hear she's not coming. Then his whole thing is, this is an incident and it's going to need to have some kind of solution. All eyes are on. So he talks to these guys, and then we see, and then Memucan answers before the king. He answered before the king and the princes, and he said this: Queen Vashti has not only wronged the king, but also all of the princes, all of the people who are in the provinces of a King Ahasuerus. So there, he begins to say this: King, the offense is against you, but it's against all of us as well. And this is because a person has defied a direct order. Now, some would look at that and say she was also supposed to be the entertainment, and they're feeling rebuffed that where's the entertainment? We were wanting to see just as the king was. Yeah, but the idea that she would have a willingness to absolutely snub what the king had to say is really an offense against them all, is more apparent what he's talking about here. For the queen's behavior will become known, and this is how we know it's the latter. He's worried about how this looks as far as the optics rather than some personal snub towards those guys. The queen's behavior will become known to all women, so that they will despise their husbands in their eyes. And when they report, King Ahasuerus commanded Queen Vashti to be brought in before him, but she did not come. So they're recounting everything that's just taken place. Now, their concern is what will happen when word gets out. Now, again, he's brought them in as counselors for that very purpose. We got to take into account all of the collateral that could come from this, and we got to make sure that what we do is thought through, because it's going to be a very, very heavy thing, and we've got to take into account all of the collateral decisions that could come as a result of this. So that's their reasoning in this. Now, again, I'm going to hold out also the idea that God is really orchestrating all of this. Because again, if you've never been through the book of Esther, you're not familiar with the name. Those of you who do realize that a guy named Haman is coming into the picture not long hereafter. And his desire is to eradicate the Jews, wants them dead. And he's taking great measures. He will be taking great measures to do precisely that. In order for, now again, God can do anything, and he could do this any way that he wanted to, but he's going to use people in order to bring about his will, rather than just waving his hand like he did, you can kind of say in Egypt, and eradicating, countless people to bring about his will. Still, he used very much human people, so Moses and Aaron and all the rest of them as they, went out at the Exodus. But he could do something very extravagant. He could wipe out Haman and anybody that wanted to come. He could do something in the supernatural sense like this. But rather he involves humans, and it becomes a very human story. And again, it's recorded for us here, these 30 or 2,500 years after the events, that we can look back and say, look at what God does when he governs through men and how he moves things into place to bring about his purpose. So with all that said, verse 18, this very day, the noble ladies of Persia and Media will say to their to all the king's officials that they have heard of the behavior of the queen. Thus there will be an excessive contempt and wrath. So they're concerned that this would spread and that this could become something much bigger than just one person. Now, again, do I think that they're kind of, there's a lot of hyperbole in this, and are they making it bigger than it's supposed to? Because, they're the counselors and they're wanting to take strong actions and they're thinking there's going to be some kind of revolt. Is it paranoia? Is it just, again, making mountains out of molehills? You can make the argument for any of those things. If we just take them at their face value words, they're saying this will have such a ripple effect that wives will begin to rebel against their husbands, and women will see this as she's the rallying person. She's the one who's going to do this. So it already tells you that they're going in a very heavy-handed way to answer what she's done. So verse 15, or 19 rather, here's what they say. Now, if it pleases the king, let a royal decree go out from him, and let it be recorded in the laws of the Persians and the Medes, so that it will not be altered, that Vashti shall come no more before King Ahasuerus, and let the king give her royal position to another who is better than she. So however they draft it, that's going to be the bottom line to it. Because of her rebelliousness against the king, he's going to say she can never come before me. She is taken from her position, and she can never return from this. And by writing a law that is the Medes and the Persians, we know this again with Daniel. Why was it that that they were almost burned, and why was it that again Daniel was almost eaten by lions? It's because there were decrees that were made, and they were recorded in such a way that they could not be altered. This is another one of those as well. So again, here's where some speculation comes in. Why are these guys so adamant that we have to make sure that this is one of those laws that is unalterable? And one of the speculations, again, it's speculation, just kind of interesting to throw out. By doing so, if it was just something like, well, we're going to put her on a timeout or whatever that is, and it's going to last for a certain amount of time, she would know it was the counselors who had given that counsel. But if she gets back into the good graces, could she turn the king against those guys in a retaliatory way? So some people speculate that that's why they are so adamant that this needs to be this way. It could also be this too. They really genuinely think that there could be some kind of a revolt inside the country. And so if we put in something that is, hey, this person who would be this heroine rallying person is going to be put aside and have no place whatsoever, and let anybody be on notice that if they try to do likewise, this is what's supposed to happen. Because it's not just the queen. You're going to find that what they put in here is that it goes throughout the entirety of the kingdom. And here's how it's going to be going forward. So her one act of defiance will subjugate the women of this kingdom in ways that had not been happening up to this point from what we can see. And you'll just see by the way it's drafted. So here's what it says in verse 20. When the king's decree, which he will make, is proclaimed throughout all of his empire, for it is great, all wives will honor their husbands, both great and small. So you can see this is not just a queen. It's not just any of the princes, none of the royalty. It is to every single household. This is the way that it's supposed to be. And it's a pretty interesting thing to try to do throughout an entire, kingdom made up of a lot of different kinds of people. Unlike the things that you would find as far as the roles and the responsibilities that God has for men and women in the law, that's for the people governed by the law. It's not that God's making everybody do those kind of things, because that's usually the equivalent. Well, what's wrong with this if God says that they're supposed to be that way with husbands and wives in the Bible? Those are the people that are willing to do as he says. Those are the people who become compliant to his word and to what he desires. In this case, it's a kingdom comprised of a whole lot of different kind of people, obviously from what we're about to read, that even the languages themselves, there's no language of the Persian Empire. What there was of the people of Israel, Hebrew was their language. If they were going to be the children of Israel, they were going to live in accordance with the law, and if not, they were going to be punished as a result of it. So we're comparing apples to oranges if people try to make that case. So again, verse 20: when the king's decree, which will make is proclaimed throughout all of his empire, all wives will honor their husbands, both great and small. And the reply pleased the king and the princes, and the king did according to the word of Memucan. So it tells us in verse 22, so he sent out the letters to all of the king's provinces. And you'll see that there's these additions here. To each province in his own script, or in its own script. So whatever they were speaking and the languages that were being spoken in the other provinces, this was going to be, they were going to allow this to be done throughout everywhere, but the power was going to ultimately lie in the hands of the man in the absolute sense. So that by implication means it may not have been that way in some of the cultures within the provinces and the farther reaches of the kingdom, not close to where he was, but of all the places that had been conquered, if you will. And so cultures may have been different in the way that they treated men and women. So this was from the top down of the king. It's going to go all the way down to every place that he has power. Think about this. It would even be all the way out into Israel and those areas there too that are starting. That whole work is going on with Zerubbabel and before Ezra and Nehemiah. So all that stuff's happening there. This is the culture anywhere that they've got any kind of power. The king's words are going to be done this way. Look at what else it says in verse 22. Each of the provinces in its own script, and to every people in their own language, that each man should be master in his own house and speak in the language of his own people. So that even speaks what it gives just by implication that there are maybe households that are from different groups of people, husbands and wives that are married, but even at this, hey, our kids are going to speak my language, the husband would say, and be able to, and he would have the edict here. Now, how enforceable would this be and all the rest of it is, that's a separate matter altogether. But the idea that this one event was going to change the course of how the entire kingdom functioned gives you an idea of just how many things are changed because of one incident. So again, it sets the table for everything that's going to happen going forward as we study through this book. And it puts in motion the next chapter is like, okay, now we need to look for her replacement. And so there's the what they propose to do. There has to be a queen. And so here's how we're going to go about bringing her in. So again, the king, though he has absolute power, you can see that he is very much, I guess you could almost say, subject to the idea of not doing anything kind of unilaterally. He does take into account what do the counselors have to say about this, because it's a big deal. So we'll pick up that in chapter 2. Again, I know chapter 1's a pretty small chapter for us to handle. There's not a lot here. It's just a historical record, clearly. But the things I see that God maneuvers in place here with the intention, very simply, that he wants to have his person in the place where she is able to affect the outcome of what is to take place. And again, when people are involved in the process, once again, there's just so much in the way of passing down through the generations that mankind is put in a place of needing to trust him, and that he is able to use them. Again, it just is God showing what he is capable to do through people. So it's a very interesting study. We'll get into chapter 2 next week. And if I've covered anything, or if you are interested in the things that were on the screen, please contact me through the email, and I'll be happy to send them to you. The email, you can get a link there at our website, which is oldpaththeology.net. And I look forward to going to chapter 2 next week.